So with that, now would open the floor and lines for questions. If you do have a question, please raise your hand. Someone can bring a microphone to you, and that way people who are participating by webcast won't just hear the answer, they'll get to hear the question too. And would love to start with a question in the room here if we can. So who's got a question?
Greg Blunden.
Someone's got a question. Say your name.
I'm Greg Hines, and I work for NSPI. Wayne, this question is about all the work that's going on of late as it relates to interconnections with New Brunswick and beyond, and the potential new sources of energy that can make us more green.
Great. Thanks, Greg. So here in Nova Scotia, for quite some time, we've been looking at solutions to take us from 60% renewable to 100. Some of those solutions will be here in the province. We'll look to build more wind, more solar. But we'll also look to draw from our friends that are around us. So we'll look to take more energy from Newfoundland and Labrador. We'll look to take some energy from New Brunswick and Quebec. So what we've been talking recently to New Brunswick and Quebec about is a transmission corridor, a new transmission corridor that would be similar to the Maritime Link, except it would run between here in Quebec, potentially here in New England as well, to access clean energy. Quebec is the biggest producer of hydroelectricity and has lots. So it's a promising start. We still have a long way to go, but there's interest from Quebec and from New Brunswick to build a transmission corridor. Early days, but I would say promising. And Scott's had some conversations as well with the leaders of Hydro-Quebec. So it needs to be part of our future solution, and I'm optimistic that we'll find a way to work together.
Another question from the room. We can start picking on people. I know we have a couple of submitted questions, Marley, but let's tackle one of those.
Sure. We do have a question from an employee in Maine, and they are asking, what is the status of the sale of Emera Maine? We've gone through a long process of approvals in Maine. We've secured all approvals except for the final approval from the Maine Public Utility Commission, the MPUC. As part of that process, we have entered into a settlement agreement that is now in front of the Commission. The Commission has just yesterday, in fact, set a date for deliberation of that, which is next Thursday. We are hopeful that the Commission will approve the transaction during its deliberations next Thursday. There's no guarantee of that. They could look for additional process or additional information in order to make that final determination, but we think we have met the test of this transaction being a net benefit to customers. And as soon as we receive the approval from the Maine Public Utility Commission, the transaction is scheduled to close within 3 days. So that's the last piece left, and as soon as we get that approval, the transaction would close 3 days later. Scott. Oh.
Nope. Go ahead.
Another question online. Thanks for cutting me off there. A question from an employee in New Mexico. How do you see the gas businesses fitting into our strategy?
You know, it's a really good and important question, because I know so many times it can seem that our strategy and our conversation can seem electric-centric. But look, you know, in my view, the gas utility plays a really important role in supporting and enabling both the decarbonization of the electricity sector and also in electrification itself. And so, the fact is that using natural gas directly delivered to the customer to heat your water or to heat your home or business, as the case may be, is the most efficient way of providing that service. There is burning that cleaner natural gas in that home appliance is much more efficient than using natural gas to generate electricity and then transmit that electricity to the house. But of course, we understand in this world of everybody focused on decarbonization that it makes one wonder about what does that mean for natural gas. And there are some regions in the world, including some regions in North America, that are starting to raise that question and wonder about, does it make sense for us to continue to connect new homes to natural gas? The reality is it's a huge challenge ahead to decarbonize the economy, to decarbonize the electric sector, to decarbonize the transportation sector. And the way to decarbonize those other sectors of the economy is to electrify them. But in order to do that, of course, the electricity sector, the Nova Scotia Powers and the Tampa Electrics and the Barbados Light and Powers and the Grand Bahama Power Corporations and all of our utility peers need to be able to support that. And so the Peoples Gas type businesses, the New Mexico Gas type businesses, they can be relieving some of that pressure in terms of the energy consumption and using a very efficient form of energy in order to do that. So I look at it as those natural gas LDCs or those natural gas local distribution companies as enabling the decarbonization and electrification of the rest of the economy. But look, this is a debate that's going to be controversial because there's other people who are saying, no, more natural gas is bad and everything should just be renewable. The reality is today, it's not possible for 100% renewable today. Maybe unless you're in Quebec, you can do that, or if you are okay with nuclear and consider that renewable. But the reality is, of course, if you're relying on wind or solar, you can have multiple days in a row without much wind or without much sun, and you need to still be able to generate electricity, and natural gas is an important part of that, both as it relates to the backup generation required to support the electric grid, but also, I think, in enabling an efficient form of delivery of energy for customers in the heating of space and the heating of water, which is really the primary uses for energy today and for most of us. Still looking for another question in the room. There we go. Over here on the side.
Is this on? Hi, I'm Kathy Sexton. I work with NSP. And I'm just curious about the pilot project in Elmsdale. So was that a success? What were the learnings from that? And I'm curious, so the people inside the house, are they able to tell they're using a different source of power? Like, what does battery look like? This kind of thing.
It was a success. I think what we learned from it was that we need to do more testing and more engagement with customers. It was a little bit, I would say, passive as it related to customers. So the next round will be much more focused on the customer and the experience the customer has and the gleanings from that. It was really our first pilot to test it out. The pilot will inform the next one, which will be at a much more engaged level at the customer. So they didn't really have a sense of, are you on the battery or are you on the normal system, unless the power flicked out. But really, the next level will be much more engagement.
But it's a really important question, Kathy. So thank you for that, because I think one of the important things that we have to focus on as we continue to try these new innovations and to try new things is to make sure that we're if it's a pilot, is that make sure that we're looking at it and holding ourselves accountable to say, well, how is it going? And let's talk about it. And what have we learned? And how are we going to use that in future? And that's a really important part as we drive a lot of this innovation through all different parts of the company today. So, great question. Thank you.
I was driving the team a little crazy when I came to Nova Scotia Power because I was suggesting that we should be shutting the power off 5, 6, 7 times a day and finding out how customers were experiencing it and what it was. But I was informed that was not a good idea this time around. But next time, that's what we're going to try and do. So if you're interested in a battery in your house, be prepared.
Hello, this is Victor Zhu from Nova Scotia Power. So I just have a question, maybe for both Wayne and Scott, about the electrification, right? So the electrification that, over the past couple of years, we talked a lot about, the adoption for in the consumer market for heat pumps and the electric vehicles. Do you see any new opportunities in the market that, going to benefit the ratepayers, in Nova Scotia area? Or if there's any kind of, the regional specific kind of opportunities in Nova Scotia and cross, Emera affiliates, across North America, do we see any kind of, the trends in the kind of more opportunities and more exciting things may happen in the consumer market that people can benefit from electrification? So trying to understand that what could happen in the next couple of years.
Thanks, Victor, for the question. So when I think about in Nova Scotia, what are benefits that customers can have immediately from electrification? So one of the benefits, and there's a bit of a trade-off. So if you had an electric vehicle, it would be much cheaper to run your car on electricity rather than natural gas from an operating cost perspective. There's also much less maintenance. The challenge is the cost of an electric car, the capital cost, right now is higher. So for many people, the trade-off is, do I spend more upfront to get kind of lower cost savings over time? Some provinces offer subsidies for EVs, which help address that. But I think over time, what we're seeing is the cost of electric cars moving down. There's many more of them available. Next year, there'll be more than 50 versions of electric cars available. So I think we're very close to seeing that crossover. So that's one area where I think we'll see it. Not today, next year, but certainly in the next 2 or 3 years. There are other products inside your house. For instance, if you heat here with oil, certainly electricity is a compelling substitute for that. So I think there are more products and more things. And one of the things we'd like to offer, which is very similar to the heat pump program, where we provide financing and we set customers up with certified dealers, we'd like to offer them batteries under the same type of agreement. Now, the batteries are still expensive. They're not quite there, so we need some help on how to finance that. Maybe the provincial government puts some money in, or the feds. But again, in a few years, as battery costs continue to fall, that will be an economic answer. So I wish I could say there are more products today, but there are things like your hot water tank, which if you converted to electricity would make sense today. So hopefully that answers your question.
And I think, there's no question that the transportation side is potentially the game changer as it relates to sort of the electrification, decarbonization opportunity, because of course, a lot of the decarbonization focus has happened in the energy sector, in the electricity sector, in part because relatively it's the easiest. Getting at some of those other parts of the economy is hard, but it is starting to gain momentum. And one of the pieces that will be game changing is not just the cost of batteries, but the capacity of batteries. And Rob Bennett, Karen Hutt, and I recently had the opportunity to meet with Paul DeBar, who is the Undersecretary of Science for the U.S. government, and his responsibility for, among other things, NASA and the national labs, the U.S. national labs. It includes Sandia National Labs that we're working with Emera Technologies. And one of the things that was interesting that he said is that they are now working on battery chemistry that within 5 years he believes will be commercialized, that will be 300 to 400% more capacity than battery chemistries today. So that in itself will be game changing. It'll be game changing as it relates to the transportation sector, but also for the utility, and thinking about that in application for supporting electrification, and maybe changing the dynamic around what do we need to backstop the intermittent renewables. So that's all really exciting.
Scott, we have another question over here. Oh, you good? A question from a Nova Scotia Power employee. They write, I worked the last storm in the western area of Nova Scotia where trees are growing through the feeders. This is causing frequent outages when the weather turns. Do we have any plans on increasing the spending around vegetation management?
Trees. Boy, I talk a lot about trees. I never thought I'd talk this much about trees. So we do spend a lot of money annually on tree trimming, about $25 million. We spend a lot more money on other things to help with reliability. But trees are a challenge, to be honest. In some places, we can trim the trees. If it's on a customer's property, we have to do that with their permission. Here in the city, it's difficult as well. People love their trees, and I'm one of the people who love trees. So it's a challenge to find the right balance between trimming back the trees or cutting the trees and respecting customers' wishes. So we're looking at more ways to do that more effectively. But some of the things we've been talking about, these intelligent feeders, batteries in homes, I'm more interested in finding solutions there because, quite frankly, we're never going to get the social license to chop down all the trees we need to chop down. And so we're going to continue to do that in a smart way. We're trying to improve the approach to trimming trees, but it's going to be an issue for us for sure. So we're focused on finding other solutions that can augment that and increase reliability without having to cut down trees.
Next, a hand over here. We've got a couple.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm wondering, how smart is a smart meter? Like, if you have access to all my information from my usage and such, then why can't I have access to that too, so I can control when I turn off my power or reduce it at least?
So we're just it's a great question, and how smart are smart meters? So they can be very smart or not so smart. It depends on how they're utilized and in what way customers agree to let you use that. But they are able to give you quite a bit of detail about the energy use within your home on a regular 15-minute interval, which will give you great insight into, is my fridge running efficiently? Should I look at replacing my fridge? So eventually we're going to get to the point where more information can be shared with you, but we're focused right now on the deployment of the meters. The next focus will be on the piece of software, the intelligence that sits on top of that, and then we'll start to communicate that back and forth with customers. It might be different in other jurisdictions, and there's a whole range. Some people use the meter in a not so smart way, which is really just to tell us when you have no electricity in your house, to a very smart way, which allows you to gain great insights into your home and control your devices.
Bring on like a subsidy for those of us who would reduce their amount of electricity overnight or on the weekend or something like that?
So the question of subsidies, I think we're more interested in finding rate structures, offering different rate structures that would incent people to do the right thing, to shift their load to when there's more wind or when the electricity is cheaper, as opposed to a direct subsidy.
Okay.
So, a hand up over here.
I wondered if there was any update on, Robin McAdam, any update on Muskrat Falls and that energy coming to Nova Scotia?
You want to tackle that or me?
I might have lost my throat.
So, does that mean you'd like me to answer this question, Wayne? So good question. Of course, look, while the Maritime Link has now been in service for effectively 2 years now, the Muskrat Falls project obviously took longer to complete. The schedule from Nalcor is that energy would start being delivered to Nova Scotia in mid-2020, mid this year. In fact, I will be on site. We're going to take the directors up to tour Muskrat Falls in about a month's time. We know that they've got the first turbine in, and it has spun. I suspect the second turbine is about in the same place. So I'll get more of a bird's eye view when we're there in a month. But they've been working through their issues. All the hard work for them is done. They're really just in the final stages, and everything we know is still on track for probably the later definition of mid 2020 than the early definition of mid, but for mid 2020. Thanks for the question.
Scott, we have time for one more, if there's anyone in the room.
Apparently,
middle mic. Sorry, Dave. Not today. No.
I've been muted again. Yeah, thanks for this. This is very great. It's wonderful to hear all the stories. I'm a little concerned about the coronavirus, in particular how it affected the TSX yesterday, but can you just maybe talk about how we're preparing for that over the next few weeks?
Sure, great question, and I'll lean on Shan Ren in a second for that. And frankly, not just yesterday affecting the TSX, but today has been an even more difficult day in markets around the world. And truthfully, I think that the impact on the markets is the coronavirus is the catalyst, but there are other factors that have influenced that, not the least of which valuations have been very high. So the market's been ready for a correction, and we're seeing some of that. Of course, we do have, largely coming out of previous pandemics like H1N1 and SARS, we do have a pandemic plan. And that is in place. We've been talking about that recently, including talking about doing a tabletop exercise just to sort of refresh us in that. But maybe with a bit of that introduction, Shan's been leading that thinking and conversation recently. So I'll let Shan give you a more precise answer.
Thanks, Scott. So I have one of my responsibilities is I oversee pandemic for all the Emera companies, but in each of the companies there is a pandemic lead, or affectionately titled a pandemic ambassador. And they've been working with the HR teams, and they've been working with the safety teams actually since we started down this path. So since the coronavirus was identified on December 31st, we're on day 60. And worldwide, we're at over 82,000 cases. But there are no cases in the jurisdictions we operate in, and there are limited cases in Canada, the US, and no cases in the Caribbean. We are at level 1. We communicated that about 3 weeks ago to everybody, which means it's monitoring. So every day we monitor, and we assess, and we look at risks. We consider what the World Health Organization has put out, and the Center for Disease Control in the US, and the Canadian Health Agency as well. All of those groups for Canada, the US, and the Caribbean have rated our exposure risk at the current time as low, and so our plan has not advanced, but we are prepared for a level 2 advancement, and each of the affiliates has prepared their own pandemic plans and have reviewed their contingency plans to get ready for if they need to move to a level 2 stage. And we talk on a frequent and regular basis, and I'm confident we have the right systems in place to progress. We're very much focused on prevention, so I have a message about hand washing, disinfectants, as well as cover yourself if you cough, and then containment. So if you're sick, stay home. So it's very important that people think of that in order to prevent a broader spread to other employees and our customers as well. Anything else?
Thanks, Shan. Thanks for the question, Dave. So before I wrap up, I do want to remind everyone that our annual Code of Conduct training is now underway, and all eligible employees, including the CEO, are expected to complete that training by the end of this month, by the end of March. All team members across all Emera companies, we share a common code of conduct, and our code is really what helps to connect us with a common purpose and put our shared values into action. And of course, those values focus on safety, health and the environment, customers, integrity, respect and collaboration, and excellence. And I know everyone across the Emera company shares a responsibility to know the code and to discuss it with your managers and teams and put it into action every day. And so with that, that's all the time that we have for today. We ran a few minutes over. I appreciate your tolerance of that. Special thank you to Wayne and to Michelle for leading us and facilitating some great conversation and important learnings. As always, the slide deck from today is available If you want to share that with your teams or use that to advance the conversation and to keep talking, would encourage you to do that. And as always, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. Email address is there. Walk by my office when I'm there. Any of the above would be happy to answer any more questions or have a conversation. Thank you very much for your participation.